Who will be the first overall pick? That is one of the biggest questions as we sit here 39 days out from the 2023 NFL Draft. Not surprisingly, a lot of quarterbacks on the list. Perhaps surprisingly, C.J. Stroud there at the top as the favorite, followed by Bryce Young out of Alabama. There you see Anthony Richardson, as we heard in the package here, one of the best quarterbacks athletically in this draft class, maybe the best athlete. Will Levis, a distant fourth at 30-1. And then you see the two edge rushers there, Will Anderson and Tyree Wilson, round out the list. All right, welcome to the With the First Pick podcast mock draft special here on CBS Sports HQ. I'm Ryan Wilson. I'm joined by our general manager, Rick Spielman, and our QB1, Danny Kanell. And over the next hour, we're going to go through all 31 of my picks in my latest mock draft. You can find it on CBSSports.com. Gentlemen, let's get to it. Let's start at the top. Rick, you and I talk every single day, so I'm going to let Danny go first because he is our QB1 here. And in my latest mock draft, Danny, I had the Panthers taking Bryce Young, but as we heard in the package there, maybe it's C.J. Stroud. According to Vegas, and I just told you before we started, I talked to a source earlier this afternoon that thinks C.J. might be the guy in Carolina. What do you think?
My money's on Bryce Young. I think if you ask any evaluator, anybody who's watched the actual game film from the past two seasons and say, who's the best quarterback? Everybody says Bryce Young. But I see this happen every single offseason leading up to the draft. The guy who's projected to be number one, you try to talk yourself out of almost. And the guy who's second or third, we find ourselves trying to talk ourselves into. But I think Bryce Young is a step above when I look at his ability to process information, to process it quickly, to play within a system, and to improvise. He's got it all. And as much as we talk about his frame, he didn't miss much time at Alabama. Like with Tua coming out, there was an injury history. With Bryce, there really isn't. So for me, I'll go ahead and take the risk on his size and bet on an NFL which is protecting quarterbacks more so than they ever have before and say, I'll roll the dice with a guy I know who can play, but maybe he has a chance of getting hurt, as opposed to the guy who might be a little bit safer just because he looks more durable.
Yeah, Danny, I'll follow up with that. I agree with you 100%. What I don't agree with is with Ryan Wilson when he tells the fans out there that you're QB1 and then Brady Quinn's QB1 when Brady Quinn's on. So it's like trying to decide between Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud. I don't know who to go with. But I will go. Bryce has always been the top guy on my board. I love his skill set, the way he just plays the game with natural savvy and smarts and leadership, everything you want in a quarterback except for the size. But then you have C.J. Stroud, who was definitely my number two, but all of a sudden you watch the Michigan game. We talked about it earlier on the podcast, and some of the NFL throws that he made in that game, even though they lost, but you started to see him make some plays, some off-schedule plays, especially with his legs. And then he goes down against an NFL defense versus the University of Georgia. They end up losing a game, but may have had his best game of his career. So all of a sudden, he's creeping up there, right, nipping at the heels of Bryce Young. Bryce Young doesn't work at the combine. C.J. Stroud may have had one of the best throwing combine workouts I've ever seen a quarterback have. So we're going to be out at these pro days over the next couple of days. We're going to get to see him back to back. We'll be at C.J. Stroud's workout on Wednesday. We'll be down at Alabama at Bryce Young's workout on Thursday. And hopefully that'll give us some clarity. But I'm still going to have Bryce Young right now as my number 1A.
Hey, Danny, if you had 45 seconds, if you took the under amount of time until Rick made fun of me, you would have won a lot of money. So I hope you made that bet. Danny, I'm going to come right back to you here. We just talked about C.J. Stroud and 1 and 1A where Rick has him, and I feel the same way. You just talked about liking Bryce Young. How do you feel about sitting there at number 2? I had heard that the Houston Texans, before the Panthers traded up, that they were very interested in Bryce Young and perhaps moving up for him. They're stuck at 2 now. Do they have to, quote-unquote, settle for C.J. Stroud, or is that a guy you can build a team around?
Oh, it's a solid number 2. I wouldn't even say 1A, 1B. I have 1 Bryce Young and 2 C.J. Stroud, but I think it's a great option to have. And I'll tell you what, I remember going back and changing my mind about a quarterback, and it was based on two things. Because leading into that Georgia game, I thought C.J. Stroud was a little bit overrated and was worried about his mobility and saw some inconsistency there and wondered if he was a product of the system playing against, subpar competition, 10 weeks out of 12 within the Big Ten. But then when he went up against the big boys in Georgia, he showcased the ability to step up on the big stage, to make throws against tight windows, but more importantly, which is becoming a prerequisite, to showcase some mobility. And when things weren't there protection-wise, he was able to move around, make some plays, extend plays, and make plays on the run. So I thought that was huge. The other aspect to it, and we talked a little bit about this in Indianapolis, and I hadn't had this kind of awakening since I met Justin Herbert. Like Justin Herbert coming out of Oregon, if you remember, he wasn't pegged as a leader, and there were questions about his personality. And I would say it was a similar mindset with C.J. Stroud. Like when you hear him talk with the media, I'm not really, enthused by what I hear from him. But when I met him in person, I saw a personality which spoke volumes about his confidence level, his comfort in his own skin, and the ability to actually be a leader. So I'm much more bullish on C.J. Stroud for those two reasons. The Georgia game, but then meeting him in person. I know it was only 10 minutes, but his personality left me thinking, man, I didn't see this side of him. And it's a side you can picture going into an NFL huddle and getting guys to rally around you, stepping in that locker room in an offseason and getting guys to follow you. I really bought into C.J. Stroud. And then he threw, which Rick alluded to before, and it blew everybody away.
Yeah, Danny, I just want to make one point. The fans out there that are watching this, Danny, not myself, not Ryan Wilson, said the Big Ten only had 2 teams in it. I think it's pretty good football. So if you want to attack someone, go to Danny Kanell at whatever.com and let him know your thoughts on 10 football, because I do think there's more than 2 teams in the Big Ten that play pretty good football. And I understand I'm assuming you're trying to compare it to the SEC, which I think has outstanding athletes as well. But I'm not going to discredit C.J. Stroud for, one, playing in the Big Ten, or 2, because everybody says that he has true number 1 pro-type receivers that are number 1 receivers in the NFL. You still have to make those throws. You still have to make those go through your progressions. You still have to win big games, and he has shown and proven that he can do that through his career. And he's one of those guys. I always look for guys in the draft that are ascending or descending, and he is definitely ascending as he goes through this pre-draft process.
Danny, it's important to note that Rick is an Ohio guy through and through. We had this conversation at the Super Bowl. He is all about the Midwest guys being tougher football players than the South Florida guys. Your team BMAC in terms of South Florida. So I think that's why Rick took umbrage with your comments about the Big Ten there. So note for the future. All right, let's go on to pick number 3 here. The Cardinals. Rick and I, you and I have talked about this pick to death at this point. We could probably fall asleep and have the same conversation. Cardinals have a new coaching staff, new general manager. Will Anderson feels like the easiest pick on planet Earth if you're in that position and you want to get a clean player and a guy that's going to dominate from day one. Right, Rick?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm sure they'll have a lot of discussions on Jalen Carter here as well, who I think is maybe the most dominant defensive player in collegiate football that is entering this draft when he plays hard every snap. There are times when you watch him on tape, he's not going 100% every snap, but when he turns it on, I don't think that he's blockable, and I think it's going to be a tough time blocking him up here at the NFL level as well. You have the off-field issue that popped up at the Combine, so that'll be a red flag on him, although it sounds like he's not going to get pressed for charges. But Will Anderson right here, to me, is one of the most dominant defensive end pass rushers that I've seen out recently, especially in 2021. When I did all the tape on him in 2021, I thought he was the best Alabama defensive player that has came out in a long time. Didn't have maybe the same flash and the same polish on him that he had in 2021, but they didn't play him all the time as a wide 9 technique. They reduced him down inside. That's not his deal, but I have no doubt with his character, with his football ability, with his athletic ability, he'll be a surefire hit for the new coach and the new general manager of the Arizona Cardinals.
I'm with you, Rick. I love Will Anderson Jr. And I go back, I remember hearing him speak for the first time, probably last September, like during that breakout season he had in 2021. And I heard him talking about his teammates, and they were just coming off a lackluster performance, and he was calling out guys saying, hey, this isn't the standard. And I saw a leader, and I saw somebody who I think you can envision being at minimum like a 10-year NFL veteran, because you guys know this better than anybody. Like, it takes a certain mindset to transition from college to the NFL and how to be a true professional. And guys that know what it takes and do it are the guys that last. And then you combine that with somebody who has the physical skill set that he has and the ability to rush the passer. And I totally agree with you, Rick. Like the season this year, there was a drop off, but you also saw opposing offenses, after watching him wreak havoc for an entire season in 2021, adjust protection, start to slide his way, start to double team him. And he still had an incredibly productive season. So I love the physical skill set. I love the mental aspect to it. I love the professionalism and the type of leadership you're going to get on the defensive side of the ball. I know there's a pretty safe floor there, and I'm pretty excited for Will Anderson Jr. to see what exactly the ceiling could be with him, because I think the sky is the limit.
So, guys, we were both on the set when Anthony Richardson approached, and I think it's safe to say that Anthony Richardson looked more like Will Anderson than Will Anderson looked like Will Anderson. That's how big that young man was. There you go, Rick, young man for you there. So, Dan, I'm going to come back to you as our quarterback here. The Colts at 4, Shane Steichen, all that he did as a new coach, all that he did in Philadelphia with Jalen Hurts. Anthony Richardson here, is that a fit that you can see working out, perhaps not in year 1, but year 2 through 6 or 7?
Yeah, and if you're getting to this point where Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud are off the board, why not swing for the fences? I mean, we saw Shane Steichen, the offense he was running. We saw what he was able to do with Jalen Hurts. A similar quarterback, but nowhere near the experience that Hurts had, playing at Bama, playing at Oklahoma, the mindset he had. It's a different, situation that you're walking into. This is a very, very raw quarterback who hasn't played a ton, and he's played in 2 different systems as well. And I know Jalen Hurts did, but it was just 2 seasons that we saw Anthony Richardson. And there is a wow factor that is there if you can just get the consistency to get him to perform the same over and over and make even the simple throws over and over. Because, you can make the wow throws, but what can you do when there's a guy running open on a crossing route, or you need to hit a post that's wide open, but you airmail it, or you miss a 3rd and 8 hook route because you bounce it in the dirt? Those are the types of things you see from Anthony Richardson, but you also see an electric running capability where I think he's almost as electric as Lamar Jackson, not quite as explosive, but he is more powerful, and his arm is an absolute cannon. So I see the enticement there for the Colts to take Anthony Richardson and say, all right, we're going to take this risk, but the reward could be off the charts.
Yeah, and you're taking a risk now. And, Danny, we've talked about this on the set. Can accuracy be improved? How quickly is he processing? Is he a one-read guy? And if it's not there, then he takes off and relies on his natural athletic skills, which are incredible, to make plays with his feet. But I can see the fit there, and I can see the comparison a little bit to Jalen Hurts, except this guy is bigger, faster, more athletic, if that's hard to believe. And he's probably got a better throwing motion and a stronger arm. The issue is he is not as accurate, I don't think, as Jalen Hurts was. I watched Jalen Hurts at Alabama, then I watched him at Oklahoma, and I thought he improved his accuracy in that system in Oklahoma. But whatever team drafts him, and if it is the Indianapolis Colts, then you're going to have to adjust your offensive scheme to fit what he does best. And whether that's half reads, whether that's some kind of RPO system, because when you watch him, you see these wow-type throws. I can't believe he just made that type of throw, but I can say it on the next step, how can he make that type of throw? So it's wow either one way or the other. It's funny, I talked to a quarterback that we had, and he said, listen, I'm going to go out in this game. And I said, I don't know what's going to happen, but something's going to happen. So strap on your seatbelt, because here we go. And I think that's going to be the same thing here with Anthony Richardson. I think he needs time to develop. It'd be great if he went into a place where he can sit for a year and then try to mature into a starting quarterback. But with all the pressure on these kids nowadays, and these quarterbacks where they're going to get taken, there's so much pressure on them to come in and be the QB that's going to save the franchise going forward. And sometimes that takes time. It did with Tua, it did with Hurst, and you just have to be patient, although the fan base isn't always as patient as they need to be.
Speaking of impatient fan bases, Rick, let's go to pick 5 here, the Seahawks. I'm going to come back to you to talk about Jalen Carter because when I put this mock draft on Twitter, I got some pushback from Seahawks fans. They wanted to see a quarterback here, for example, and they also didn't want Jalen Carter because of the potential red flags that you talked about earlier that said John Schneider is not going to take a guy with character concerns. We don't know the degree of character concerns there are with Jalen Carter. We just know about the tragedy that happened in Athens, Georgia. All that said, and you've talked about the importance on the podcast of building through the middle, especially on the defensive line, even much more important with a player like Jalen Carter as opposed to an edge rusher, for example. Are you taking Jalen Carter here at 5? Are you thinking about quarterback? Are you thinking about something else?
No, I don't think you're going to take a quarterback here. I think, although it would be a great idea if they had the luxury of, let's say they're still in the rebuilding mode, and Anthony Richardson went to the Colts, like in your mock here, I believe. So they take Will Levis, let him sit behind Geno Smith. Geno Smith signed a 3-year deal, which is a short-term deal. Let the young quarterback learn a year or two, and then let him take over. But when you have a generational type talent like Jalen Carter, which we talked about earlier, if the character checks out, if everything and all the due diligence you do on the back end that we as the public will never know, and you feel confident in that, you're going to get one heck of a football player and a game changer in the middle of your defense. And look at what Carolina, now the biggest red flag here was in this Georgia Pro Day, biggest day of his career. Now I understand he's dealing with off-field issues and trying to get resolved the legal issues that happened in that unfortunate accident, but he couldn't even finish the workout here. So that's even another big red flag in my opinion. And he's going to have to answer that. Maybe Seattle flies back 2 weeks from now, hey, get in shape, we're going to come out and do a private workout with you. But John Schneider and Pete Carroll have done a phenomenal job in the past with some guys that have had character issues. But I think they have a system and a support in their building that make these guys thrive when they get out in Seattle. And as I said before, I've heard in the past that Seattle likes to, as they describe it, celebrate a player's uniqueness. And I think this is a unique player, not only on the field, but off the field. And they have to determine whether he fits what they're building out in Seattle, because no one expected them to be a contender last year. And the next thing you know, Pete Carroll did maybe his best coaching job of his career with the team that he had and took them all the way to the playoffs.
Yeah, Rick, you make some great points. And I know it's easy to sit in this chair and not have my job on the line, whether I'm going to make this pick or not. But I would stay away from Jalen Carter. And I know it's easy to say here, but to me, there are too many red flags. And it goes back to even just when we were talking about Will Anderson Jr., like somebody who gets what it's like to be a pro. Jalen Carter doesn't know what it's like to be a pro yet. He's got a history of bad decisions, even going back to in September when he was pulled over from a cop and he was going to 89 and a 45 and got a free pass. I mean, that could have been his decision, his wake-up call, say, you know what, maybe I just got a free lease on life and I need to take advantage of that. But then again, he had the racing and the misdemeanor charges on that fateful night, which is a tragedy unfolded, but it was yet another bad decision. Then a lot of times the combine and the workout are really just an IQ test, an ability to show people that you can prepare on your own, because he's out of Georgia's culture where they have every single minute of the day laid out for you. All right, you're going to have breakfast at 7. You're going to go to class at 8:30. You're going to work out at 11. Everything is streamlined. Well, now the first time he's a pro and his first opportunity as a pro at his own pro day, he's out of shape and he can't finish the drills. To me, this is an immature player who's had a history of bad decisions. That is a massive risk. But as you mentioned, when he goes, and that's another thing, you do see him take plays off. You're going to pay top 5 money for him. You're going to expect a 3-down tackle who's going to be, taking up multiple blockers an entire game. I think it's a massive risk, and that I would not be willing to take because of this history of bad decisions.
Would you go quarterback there?
And that?
Yeah, see, I think, but now this is the one we talked about this. We're talking about, Pete Carroll, his ability to, look at different players. This is where I wish Anthony Richardson would fall to, because I think Geno Smith would be a great mentor for him. I think Pete Carroll would also let him get on the field as a rookie and utilize some of that athleticism. And you talk about culture and competition and embracing somebody with a unique skill set. This is where I really wish Anthony Richardson would fall to, because I think it's a better fit for him. And the run game they've got going with Kenneth Walker III, you could really have some fun with Anthony Richardson in that system.
Yeah, drafted 2 offensive linemen last year that started as rookies, had a great season there. Tariq Woolen had a great season on the other side of the ball. That's why the draft is so much fun, guys. All right, let's take a quick look at those first 5 picks here that we just talked about. This first segment here. Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, quarterbacks go 1 and 2. Then Anthony Richardson, who we just talked about there, is 4. If he lasts till 5, do the Seahawks take him? We'll have to find out in real time. When we come back, though, we're going to take a look at picks 6 through 10 on the With the First Pick podcast show, CBS Sports HQ. Welcome back to With the First Pick mock draft special here on CBS Sports HQ. I'm Ryan Wilson, joined by Rick Spielman and Danny Kanell. We're on to picks 6 through 10. Guys, let's get to it. In my mock draft, I had a mock draft trade. So I had the Raiders trading up from 7 to 6. They're getting a little nervous here. The Lions moved down 1 spot. And Danny, I had the Raiders taking Will Levis, the 4th quarterback to go in the first 6 picks here. We've talked to death how bad that 2022 season was for him for a number of reasons. We talked to him on set, and I've had to rank the quarterbacks that we talked to on set in terms of gravitas, if you will. I think Levis might have been 4th. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you, Ryan. And I think I was expecting more because all I'd heard is, oh, well, wait, look at the intangibles and look what this kid could be. And every time we talk about Will Levis, I feel harsh. And it's not an anti-Will Levis take. It's just an anti-Will Levis take in the top 5, top 10 picks of the NFL draft. I just don't think it's worth it. I think there's a tremendous amount of risk that he doesn't deliver on that draft pick. He might be a nice pro, but there's way too much inconsistency for me. And by the way, we talk about Bryce Young's durability, and I know Pete Prisco loves Will Levis, but he's a guy that Pete keeps telling me, he had foot issues and he had injury issues and he shouldn't have been playing. Well, is that going to change in the NFL either? So I get that there's an excitement and everybody wants to see the next Josh Allen, but I think you're looking at potentially the next Mitch Trubisky, where if things are clean around him and you have a really good defense, maybe you could build it there. But I also think there's a considerable amount of bust potential with Will Levis. So we'll see what happens. I don't see it. I see the tape. I see inconsistencies. I see poor decision-making and poor clock management. The end of the Ole Miss game comes to mind. But we'll see. I mean, he's smart. He's got his degree. I think you can present him to the franchise. But I just don't see it as a top 5, top 10 pick.
Are you saying that because he likes mayo in his coffee? Does that disqualify him to be a top 10 pick? Or is
Possibly, yes. Possibly. That is a major red flag.
When we sit there and evaluate him, you see all the gifts and abilities that he does have. What you don't see is the consistency, like what we talked about. But he does have a strong arm. He is athletic. We can go down a checklist. Everybody's trying to make an excuse. Well, his offensive line wasn't good. He had a young group of receivers. He was working with a whole new offensive coordinator, another system. He was supposed to take a step forward this year, and he was not able to take a step forward. So those are the things that everybody's saying, and are they excuses? But boy, Danny, you're coming out strong saying he could be the next Mitch Trubisky, and thank God Pete Prisco isn't on this podcast because he'd be coming through his screen right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, Danny, you made this point. This is not any disrespect towards Will Levis. This is just us evaluating the quarterbacks in this class. And as we sit here, Will Levis is 4th, and for me, and it sounds like for you guys, and that's where we're at. That doesn't mean he won't be drafted in the top 10 picks, because every team needs a franchise quarterback, and they're willing to take a gamble, even if that person doesn't check every box. Physically, as Rick pointed out, he does. Will Levis fits the bill. In terms of the production, it wasn't there last year. Maybe health will change that. We'll find out. For now, though, Rick, we're going to pick 7 to the Detroit Lions. They traded down in my mock draft here. And, Rick, I had them taking Tyree Wilson. We had an opportunity to talk with him at the Senior Bowl, and my word is that man tall and long and looks like he's going to be a really good football player when he puts it all together. But I'll ask you this. as the de facto Lions GM for this conversation. You have Aiden Hutchinson, you have Charles Harris, you have James Houston. How many edge rushers do you need? Is that the pick here?
Oh, yeah. You get as many as you possibly can because the rotation, the more you have, the more you can rotate, the more you can keep fresh. And I think, people have talked about them taking a corner here, but when you got a guy like Tyree Wilson, who is long, who is athletic, who is powerful, who I think has some position flexibility, not only to rush off the edge, but to line up over a guard and create mismatches there. This guy's just tapping his potential, and I think he has a tremendous upside. I know he transferred into Texas Tech, but when you watch this guy play, there is no question about this guy's motor and energy. He goes 100 miles an hour, both versus the run and pass. You see him chasing down quarterbacks when they're scrambling. He's running downfield, chasing down screens. This guy loves to play the game. He has unique traits, the length, the burst, all the athletic traits you look for in an elite pass rusher. And if this scenario happened and Detroit, if he fell to Detroit, I would run this card up there as quick as I could because I'm adding another young pass rusher. They need to improve on the defensive side of the ball. They just signed Gardner Johnson here yesterday or today. So they're building up the back end of that secondary, and it's going to help the secondary when you can get to the quarterback. And by adding Tyree Wilson, no relation to Ryan Wilson, as you see when they stand next to each other. But Ryan's trying to claim that it is his half-brother, but that's a whole nother story that we can get into later. But if they have an opportunity to get a pass rusher like this, even though he does need some technique work, but that's what these coaches get paid to do. If you give me this guy that is a piece of raw clay and give me an opportunity to mold him and shape him into a football player, I can't coach what he has. I can coach maybe the lack of technique or his get off or his pass rush moves. That'll all come in time. But give me this guy that has this length, this athleticism, this speed, this size, and I'll make him into a Pro Bowl defensive end.
Yeah, I had one word written down there, raw. That was one of the things that jumped out to me because the raw athleticism, the sheer ability to get after the passer is there. And I think it's interesting because you mentioned Gardner Johnson signing with the Lions. It looks like the Lions could be taking the same approach that the Eagles did because you are 100% spot on. You know what helps the secondary? When the quarterback doesn't have any time and he can't throw and he can't set his feet. He's constantly running for his life. And when you accumulate those pass rushers, if you stagger them correctly, you don't have to pay them all. And you can get selective in who you want to pay and who you can let go. And you can have depth at that position where you don't have to worry about, breaking the bank for one if you don't have to, much like the Eagles were able to let some guys walk along that defensive front too. So I think there's a little bit of an issue with the foot injury coming off that foot surgery that he had. You want to make sure he goes through the medicals. But if you get a player like this, long, lanky, raw, athletic, I think you could get somebody who could be an absolute stud in a rotation like we're talking about too. Just keep them coming at the quarterback.
Next up, the Falcons are on the clock at 8. And Danny, I'm going to come back to you because the Falcons have been sort of quietly busy in free agency. They added Caden Ellis, who had 7 sacks for the Saints. Jesse Bates, the third, the safety from Cincinnati, is now there. And David Onyemata can play along the defensive line, and he's a really good football player as well. Last year at this time, they focused on a quarterback in the third round. They got Desmond Ridder. This time at 8, I have them taking Christian Gonzalez, maybe the most athletic cornerback in a class filled with athletic cornerbacks. Pair him with A.J. Terrell, and that defense gets better. Are you okay with Christian Gonzalez here? Would you like to see someone else get drafted at number 8?
No, I like this pick. He's my top defensive back. And I'm like, we talked about the top 4 quarterbacks. If they're off the board, I'd be more than comfortable waiting to the second round for a guy like Hendon Hooker and saying, all right, we'll take a flyer there, but let's get a much better player who can come in and contribute early on that secondary. And Christian Gonzalez got good size, 6'1", 197. The speed and explosiveness are what jump out to you. A 4.38 40, but also a 41.5-inch vertical just really is one of those numbers that you look at and you're like, whoa, that's an eyebrow raiser. Comes from an athletic family where his dad played at UTEP. So I like this pick here. I do, and I'm curious to know what Rick thinks of this because this always kind of bothers me. I'll give you the good and the bad. The good thing is, when he was at Colorado, started his career, his DB coach went to Oregon and brought him with him. I think that's a great sign. You see a coach who recognizes talent, says, come on with me. So he brought him with him to Oregon. The one red flag, I don't even know if it's categorized as a red flag. I don't like when players skip their bowl game. Now, I'm a college football guy. I love the tradition of bowl games. I get there's some business decisions that are made. But for me, I don't love it, but I still have them at DB1. Does that even cross your radar at all, Rick? Or are you like, who cares? It's a meaningless bowl game.
I don't know. Maybe ask Ryan, because we've been together for about 2 months. I've been together more with him than I've been with my wife. And so we've shared a lot of on this topic. Ryan, I'll go ahead and let you answer that question.
Danny, there are a few things on planet Earth in Rick's 60 years on this planet that upset him more than players not participating in their bowl games. And I'll tell you exactly what he's going to say, Danny. If I roll the ball out there, I want you to compete. Now, you were there on set. He loves him some Bryce Young. And the first thing he said to Bryce Young was, listen, Bryce, I wanted you to throw here at the combine. And Bryce had an answer. I had not planned to do it. I'm going to do it at my pro day, so on and so forth. But Rick held his feet to the fire. And Rick, that's one of your big sticking points, right?
Yeah, no, I love guys that when they have an opportunity to participate. And what I can't stand is if these guys, and I understand business decisions, I understand if a player's hurt and is not, doesn't want to get hurt because he's preparing for the combine. But when you have an opportunity, look at every Alabama kid. That Sugar Bowl did not mean anything. They weren't playing in the Final Four. They weren't playing for a national championship. Yet Will Levis, who's a top 5 pick, Bryce Young, who's a top 5 pick, Brian Branch, who we're going to talk about later in the podcast, will potentially be a first-round safety. All their players played. And when we asked them, and Ryan was on a stage, I think, Danny, you might have been on, for some of the Alabama kids, they said it was one last chance that I can go out with my head held high playing with my brothers on the field. And that was important to them. What that tells you is what type of teammates they are and what type of character they're bringing into your locker room. When I see guys, and I'm not going to mention names, sitting on the sideline eating hot dogs, getting interviewed by ESPN while brothers are out there fighting their rear ends off, trying to win a bowl game, even though it may not be for a national championship, but they're out there competing. I will take the guy that wants to compete every time over the guy that may not want to compete because of self-interest. And the other thing I would ask that is you sat out that bowl game because that bowl game was meaningless for you. It was important for your university because you're going to get some money, and it was important for your team to go out there and play. But let's say you're in the last year of your NFL contract and your team is eliminated from the playoffs. So you're coming up as a free agent. Are you going to skip the last game of an NFL season because you don't want to get hurt because you want to get paid in free agency, or will you go out there and compete with the rest of your teammates?
We know that answer too.
So
because
Danny,
if you made the business decision early, you're going to make the business decision every time.
Thank you, Danny. Now, now Pete and Brian are different. We kind of like guys that like to compete and play the game.
So just to recap, the two things that Rick hates the most, not competing and hot dogs. So now we know. All right, on to pick number 9. The Chicago Bears are on the clock. And Danny, I'm going to come to you because this is sort of related to their quarterback, Justin Fields, who made progress last year, got injured toward the end of the year. He'll be healthy. And they're trying to help him slowly but surely through free agency. They added Robert Tonyan, the tight end from Green Bay. They added Nate Davis to beef up the interior offensive line. They didn't get an offensive tackle yet. So knowing that, I said, all right, I'll get one for you in this mock draft. I went with Paris Johnson Jr., played right guard in 2021, played left tackle last season for Ohio State. How do you like that pick here for Chicago?
I like it. I mean, you need to put some pieces around Justin Fields, get him a better chance. And one of the things about Paris Johnson that I've noticed is he is a better run blocker. And I think there'll be a little bit of a learning curve as a pass blocker that he is. It's kind of that raw potential that you look at. He's extremely athletic. He was a 5-star recruit coming out. He's lived up to the hype. I like the position versatility, showcasing me some of that athleticism and ability to learn on the fly. So I think he'll be fine as a pass blocker. But we also, as much as Chicago wants to talk about Justin Fields and developing a passer, you still can utilize him as a runner, which a lot of teams are starting to do now with their quarterback. And that's a place I think Paris Johnson will really excel in. He's got to get better. He's an incredibly bright young man, too. He's got an outstanding academic reputation there in Columbus. I always think that's a great sign for somebody. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be an all-pro, but it shows you now how to put in the work to take care of your business in the classroom. And that's the big jump that no one wants to talk about ever, hardly ever. With quarterbacks, we do. But every position, there is way more of a mental workload in your capacity of what you have to handle, thinking at the line of scrimmage, assignments, blocking, what am I going to have to do? And clearly Paris Johnson has that ability to do that. So I like this pick.
Yeah, I love the pick for left tackle. I just like the player that Ryan picked. So, which is half the time we talk about is mock drafts anyway. I don't love them all. But I think I'm not questioning Paris Johnson Jr.'s ability. I think he's going to be a very good NFL starter. Do I think he's going to be a Pro Bowl player? No. Who I think has an opportunity that may be a little behind him right now, but may have a higher ceiling to be a potential left tackle Pro Bowler is Broderick Jones from Georgia. I was shocked when he walked onto our stage how big he was, just shaking his hand wrapped around mine twice before I figured out where the hell my hand was. So, but I think he has more potential. He may not be as ready to start day one, but I think as you go and look over their career, that Broderick Jones will have a better career at left tackle than Paris Johnson Jr. Not saying that both of them aren't going to be good players. I just think Broderick Jones has a higher ceiling.
And the thing with Broderick Jones, Rick, is that the toughest part of his career at Georgia was practice, because he faced against 25 first-round picks at some point, it felt like, and that certainly helped him in his journey, although he did admit that at points he wasn't sure he could play the position because he was struggling so much when he got to Athens, but that certainly changed. All right, let's get to pick 10 here. The Eagles are on the clock. Rick, I'll come back to you. My guy, Myles Murphy, just so you know, Rick, he's 6'5", 275, just turned 21 years old. The Eagles get edge rush help, and, hey, I'm going to come back to what you said earlier. You can never have too much edge rush help, right?
Yeah, this one's a no-brainer. If Myles Murphy's sitting there, another young, long, athletic, just like we talked about, Tyree Wilson, little raw with his technique. His best pass rush move is a speed-to-power long arm, which means he uses one arm to collapse the defenders by the pocket. He can bend at the edge. He knows where the quarterback is in the pocket. He has excellent bursts to close, chasing down scrambles, great body control in space. He can play the run, although you'd like to see him play a little bit stronger at the point versus the run. But this guy is a high motor, high energy guy with all the athletic traits you're looking for, and he's going to be an excellent pass rusher. It's going to take him some time, just like it's going to take Tyree Wilson some time, but you're going to see these guys continue to get better through the rookie year, just like we saw Hutchinson get better. And he really came on the second half of the year. And I think these guys have that type of ability. And that for the Philadelphia Eagles to get Murphy here at number 10, that would be one of those picks where you turn it in as quickly as you can.
Yeah, you left out one of the most important assets to Myles Murphy's game. The fact he was playing in the ACC, where that's where the true speed, power, athleticism really resides in that conference. So I'm glad that one of them finally went. But you do bring up some really good points. And I'll give you this from Myles Murphy, and this goes to the effort thing and guys that want to go. Like, Clemson has not had a great year up to their expectation the last couple years. But Myles Murphy, and I think there's a couple players on this defense that haven't got as much national recognition because their team hasn't got that much national recognition because their offense has struggled. But the defense has played hard. They've finished season, and Myles Murphy has still been productive. We saw that stat that came up there. In the last 3 years, he's got the second most sacks in the league, and he goes hard every single play. So I think the sky's the limit for him. And just like we were talking about, I think the Eagles, it fits right into their game plan of what they want to do, and that's get after the passer.
Nope, that's right. And that's the first 10 picks here. So let's take a quick recap. Look at picks 6 through 10 that we just discussed. And it starts here at number 6 with Will Levis, who has a lot to prove in a short amount of time. Tyree Wilson, we talked about the edge rush there. Paris Johnson Jr. going to Chicago, and finally Myles Murphy to the Eagles. So Danny, he's leaving us. He's going to go grind some more tape on Will Levis. But Rick, stay put, because you and I are going to go through picks 11 through 20 right after this. Welcome back to the With the First Pick mock draft special here on CBS Sports HQ. You can see my latest mock draft here, picks 11 through 20 The first wide receiver goes off the board at 15. We have two offensive tackles go. Pete Skoronski goes to Tennessee, Broderick Jones to the Jets, and Joey Porter Jr. to the Patriots. I'm Ryan Wilson, joined by my guy Rick Spielman. We're going to take a look here at picks 11 through 20. And Rick, I'll just say this. The second overall pick, the Houston Texans took C.J. Stroud. They are back on the clock at pick 12. And we're going to go through a few of these because we can't get to them all because of time constraints. But I'm going to pick 12 here. I had them taking Lucas Van Ness, the edge rusher, who actually could play inside if you wanted to, out of Iowa. Do you like this pick for the Texans?
I like the pick. I don't love the pick. Just like most of your picks, I like them, and I respect you and all the hard work you put into this because you're a fine young man. This endeavor that you are taking on right now. But I don't understand why you wouldn't take, or you would have selected Quentin Johnson, the receiver from TCU. You're citing some guys on the defensive side of the ball. Rankins, who was with the Jets. You got a couple other defensive linemen you've been plugging and playing in. You just traded Cooks to Dallas. You don't have a playmaker on the outside that can do the things that Johnston can do. Okay, you just signed, I saw Devin Singleton today. You signed Schultz from Dallas as a tight end threat. But when you watch this kid play, I think he has tremendous upside. His length, his athleticism, his speed. And what's incredible about him is that his run after catch for a big, tall receiver is like a small receiver. He is quick. He's elusive. He can avoid the tackle. He can spin out. He has balance. He's got finish speed in the open field. And once he catches the ball, only concern I have is he has some concentration drops that he needs to get cleaned up. But other than that, I think this guy has an opportunity to be a big-time receiver. He's my number one receiver in this draft. They're building a roster right now for a young quarterback to come in and have playmakers around him, unlike we seen Chicago do with Justin Fields last year. They're doing it this year. But Houston is setting up the young quarterback to have success early by all the playmakers they're bringing in around him, and this would just be another playmaker to add to the mix.
Yeah, Rick, you mentioned Devin Singletary, the running back, Dalton Schultz, the tight end, Noah Brown, the wide receiver as well from Dallas, and also Robert Woods they added at wide receiver. So they are building around the young quarterback. I had them taking C.J. Stroud at number 2. I understand what you're saying, and I can actually buy into that. The Texans pick early in round 2, and you talked about this earlier on the podcast. You could take perhaps a Nolan Smith there, or a B.J. Ojulari, or a Keon White even, if you wanted to get the edge rusher there, maybe get the wide receiver at 12. I'm sold. All right, let's take a look at pick 14, where the Patriots are on the clock. I had them taking Joey Porter Jr., whose dad, of course, played for the Steelers, had a great career in the 90s and early 2000s. What do you think about this Joey Porter Jr. fit in New England, where they need help at cornerback?
They do need help at corner. I love Joey Porter Jr. He's my number 2 corner on this board. Was my number 1 until Gonzalez has had the year he had and continues to spiral upward through this draft process. But Joey Porter Jr. is tough. He's physical. He can play press. You've mentioned it numerous times on the podcast when you watched him against the all-world Harrison Jr. at Ohio State. He had a great game against him. I think he can be a shutdown corner. But this is too logical for the New England Patriots to take. Now, where I'm going to look at is that we talked about the potential of the running back thing, but I'm off that now. That was a couple of weeks ago about Bijan Robinson going there. They need offensive tackles. And they signed Riley Reif, who I think was a great player during the prime, but he's at the end of his career. I think he is best as a swing backup tackle right now. So I'm going to say that Belichick does things that no one expects. Last year in the first round, who did they take? Cole Strange, a guard from Tennessee Chattanooga, which no one saw that coming. So I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to try to think the New England way, which I don't know if I can or not. But I'm going to think they're going to take Darnell Wright, the right offensive tackle from Tennessee here is my reasoning why I would go that way. And the history that Belichick has. Not caring about the mock drafts and all the talking heads out there, including myself, what we think, going what's best for the New England Patriots. He did that last year when he selected Strange in the first round at offensive guard. I think he'll do the same thing if they fall in love with one of these tackles that are still left on the board.
No, I get it. And Darnell Wright had a great season at right tackle for Tennessee. He did play left tackle the year before. I don't think that's in his future. We talked about that on the podcast as well. Good news, Rick. We are down the home stretch. After the break, we're going to wrap things up by looking at picks 21 through 31. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to the With the First Pick mock draft special here on CBS Sports HQ. You're looking at picks 21 through 31 in my latest mock draft. We had some trades. The Jaguars moved up. The Chiefs moved up, mixing things up to get some of their players. But, Rick, we're down the home stretch here. You see Bijan Robinson going 27 to the Bills. That feels like a great fit there. Perhaps even the Cowboys think about Bijan Robinson, the pick before at 26, now that they're in a post-Zeke Elliott world. But I wanted to ask you about pick 29, where the New Orleans Saints are back in the first round because they got that first-round pick for Sean Payton going to Denver. I had them taking wide receiver Zay Flowers. They lost Jarvis Landry. They have Chris Olave. They have Mike Thomas back. They have their new quarterback and Derek Carr. Is Zay Flowers the guy, the best fit at pick 29 for New Orleans?
Well, this one was a little bit of a head scratcher for me, trying to figure out your reasoning behind taking a small nickel third receiver that's a very good football player, potential punt returner, but I don't think he's a number 2. I think he's a number 3, and I think he's a great value on Friday, especially if you can get him in the second round. When you look through this, you have to look at the 2 defensive tackles they lost in free agency, and they signed 2 to replace those guys, but they are just placeholders. There's nothing unique about either of them. But the one guy that you left on the board that I couldn't believe was still on there was Brian Brzee, and how he's still out there. He's been ascending through this draft process since the end of the season. Everybody has talked about the down year, the tragedy he went through with his sister, coming off an ACL. But he is too physically gifted, and they need help. They need to get younger up on their defensive line. And when you left him this far down in your draft, to me, take the big guys because they're few and far between. You can circle back, and I'm not taking anything away from Zay Flowers. He's an excellent football player. But when you got a big guy that you can take care of your front, and Brzee is there, I don't understand why you didn't take Brzee instead of Zay Flowers.
To be fair, Rick, there's a lot of things that I do that you don't understand, so that probably checks out. But to your point, this defensive line class is not very deep. Jalen Carter's going to go early. Brian Brzee is probably next up, and if you need help there in the interior, that is the way to go. Also the way to go, we're out of here. That's a wrap on the With the First Pick mock draft special here on CBS Sports HQ. I'm Ryan Wilson. That was Rick Spielman. Thank you, Danny Kanell. And here's our podcast, With the First Pick, wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Go check us out. Thank you, guys.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.